All right, boys. Bettrmma is back. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Everybody's been asking me, Bettrmma, why have you gone ghost? Where have you been for the past few days? Where's your picks video? And look, I tried to drop hints for you guys in Eagle MMA's live stream the other day when he was talking about the Japanese. I said, bro, I'm literally gonna fly to Japan tomorrow to go colonize. And this dude thought I was tripping. But as you can see, your boy is here in Osaka, Japan. And I just gotta say, man, I don't even have 10 subscribers, and I'm jet setting. You know, this is how Bettrmma rolls. All respect to Rigo, but El Salvador, come on, you know what I say? MMA guru, it takes him to get to what, 120,000 subscribers to take one trip down to South Africa? All because his friend is taking a trip down there, so he thought he'll tag along. Hey, this is Bettrmma, and I'm younger than both of these guys. I'm not going to say how old I am. On my own dime, this is how we do it. Before we jump into Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis 2 and the breakdown of it, I feel like I'm going to need to make a bigger video about Chris Curtis and Sean Strickland and them being high-key zesty. But this whole thing with Chris Curtis wearing an O.J. Simpson shirt that says mostly peaceful, you know, him and Sean Strickland, they're always doing this, trying to act like, oh, they're so unhinged, like, don't push them too far and they'll kill a guy. Like, you guys aren't like that. It just creates for a lot of emotionally immature young men. You know, it's just like this whole like fake tough guy thing they do. It like makes me feel like they're both in the closet or something. Big zesties of the middleweight division. Anyways, y'all, we are going to get into Chris Curtis versus Brendan Allen 2 picks and predictions video. We're going to start with the main event and then go to the first fight of the card. The first fight on the card involves a guy who fought Alex Pereira 3 times in kickboxing and beat him once in kickboxing. And he's going up against a very young athletic up-and-comer. So check out the prediction for that. Finally, a UFC fight night with 2 actual UFC fighters at the main event. We're going to get Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis 2. The question really is, in this fight, A, is Brendan Allen championship material? Because that's how they're trying to push him. This is a test for Brendan Allen to see where he's at in terms of where he stacks up against the middleweight competition. And then this is also a fight to test to see if Chris Curtis is just going to be Sean Strickland's little sidekick forever, or if he's actually going to break into the UFC top 10 and start making some noise for himself in this division. Now, the last time that these two fought, it was a very good competitive fight. I personally felt like Brendan Allen was getting the better of Chris Curtis in their fight, and then Chris Curtis hit Brendan Allen with a very good counter shot over the top of one of Brendan Allen's shots. He ends up TKO KOing Brendan Allen, and it was a very good win from Chris Curtis. This was right after we saw Chris Curtis knock out Phil Hawes. So it was a way to really build his momentum. And this was a point in time where we thought, hey, who's this Chris Curtis guy? Maybe he's actually the real deal. Since they fought, Brendan Allen has gone on a 6-fight winning streak. Recently, he's finished all 3 of his last fights. He got a great submission win over Andre Muniz. He got a much more decisive win over Bruno Silva with a first-round submission. And then he absolutely destroyed Paul Craig for 2 rounds and then submitted him very early into the 3rd round of their fight. I find it very, very weird that Brendan Allen has been ranked number 6 in the middleweight division ahead of guys like Paulo Costa, Roman Dolidze, Jack Hermanson, without fighting any of these guys. He's coming off of a win against Paul Craig. How does that make him number 6? All in all, Brendan Allen has been a good company man for the UFC, much like Chris Curtis. So I can see why the UFC is trying to do him favors in pushing him up the middleweight rankings. It at least makes sense that the UFC, as a business, runs their business with the fighters who make life easiest for them. I see Brendan Allen, the experience that he has now working at these camps like Kill Cliff, I think we're starting to see Brendan Allen in his UFC prime. He's still only 28 years old. So to see a 36-year-old Chris Curtis, who is coming off of a very lackluster performance against Marc-Andre Barriault, you have to give credit where credit is due. He has very good defense for the most part, with rolling shots off of his shoulders and his arms, and he likes to throw counter shots primarily. And the problem with Chris Curtis is that if you don't stand in the pocket with him, he doesn't like it if you are just stabbing at him from range. And that's something that Jack Hermansson did very easily to Chris Curtis in their fight. So I think Brendan Allen has definitely learned a lesson since fighting Chris Curtis. So I would see Brendan Allen sticking to his jab and his leg kick, especially his straight punches, because he does have a good 1-2 combination. And then I see Brendan Allen going for a takedown here, getting Chris Curtis's back, and then looking to submit Chris Curtis. I do think that Brendan Allen is a very underrated grappler in the middleweight division. He does very sneaky things like dropping for heel hooks when he's going for takedowns, and he has very good top pressure, good ground and pound, and a good submission game. So I think Brendan Allen is just going to outwork Chris Curtis in this fight. Of course, Chris Curtis has the chance to get that one shot and knock out Brendan Allen. But if you're thinking about in terms of odds, Brendan Allen and Chris Curtis getting matched up in 2 fights in the UFC, the odds of that happening are already crazy enough. So the odds of Chris Curtis getting the same exact result by a KO TKO, that would be another crazy result of odds. And I think, as was evidenced in Chris Curtis's fight with Kelvin Gastelum, if you're able to out-volume Chris Curtis and remain defensively sound, then you can win the fight as the fight goes on. Chris Curtis will keep his power throughout all 3 rounds, or 5 rounds, giving this as a main event. But Chris Curtis's volume, as it gets into the late 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, he's going to seriously decrease his volume on the feet. He's going to be looking primarily to counterpunch. And I think that's where the opportunities for Brendan Allen, if he doesn't finish the fight within the first 3 rounds, if he's got Chris Curtis tired in the 4th and 5th, he's definitely going to throw a good combination up top, hit him with a takedown, get a tired Chris Curtis on the ground, and submit him very easily. So I think this is going to be a relatively easy night for Brendan Allen, in all honesty. So I'd be curious to even see Brendan Allen against Sean Strickland again. I would be curious to see Brendan Allen against Dricus du Plessis, because I do think Brendan Allen has a submission advantage. So yeah, I think we have a lot of exciting matchups for Brendan Allen in the future. He's going to get an easy submission victory here, or KO TKO on the ground. Next is the co-main event of the evening. Alexander Hernandez, the lone officer himself, versus Damon Jackson. Now, if you don't know, Alexander Hernandez is or was formerly a loan officer. Loan officers typically make on minimum a couple of 6 figures a year. And if I'm not mistaken, Alexander already comes from a pretty well-off family. So yeah, Alexander Hernandez gets bread, and he's got some bread. So the fact that he's in the UFC, he sort of just does this as like a passion project of his. He's going up against Damon Jackson. This is the perfect fight for Hernandez. Damon Jackson is the king of herky-jerky, awkward head movement, and still somehow you can always catch him when he's throwing with his head straight up on the center line. Just perfect for you to counter. So Damon Jackson is just a very hittable fighter. He always finds a way to get hit, no matter how much he does this herky-jerky head movement. If Damon Jackson doesn't get put out, I'm sure he'll put up a fight and look to wear down Hernandez. Hernandez is going to look to work from range, pick Damon Jackson apart, and go for an easy 3-round decision here. It's either going to be Alexander Hernandez by a first-round KO, or it'd be Alexander Hernandez by a 3-round decision. Damon Jackson's best chance in this fight would just to be making it a brawl, making it a war, drag Alexander Hernandez into deep waters, get Hernandez tired, and then Jackson could maybe pull off an upset submission victory. That's Damon Jackson's best chance in this fight. But I don't see it happening. I see Alexander Hernandez being too fast, too aggressive and accurate and skilled on the feet. And I'm just going to be real. I don't think Damon Jackson is a UFC level fighter. I think he's LFA, Cage Warriors. Next up, Morgan Scherer versus Chepe Mariscal. So Morgan Scherer just came off of a first-round knockout in his UFC debut. He was fighting Manolo Cecchini, and Manolo was also making his UFC debut. Hasn't fought since then. Manolo essentially just got ate up with body kicks. He eventually crumbled 3.5 minutes into the first round. It really makes you question whether Morgan is a nice up-and-comer or whether Manolo is just not a UFC level fighter. And Morgan Scherer is 19-9, so it's not like there hasn't been ways that people have found to beat this guy. And if you haven't seen Chepe Mariscal fight in the past, he is a dog. He had a really entertaining fight with Trevor Peek, ended up beating Trevor Peek, and then he had a great scrap with Jack Jenkins. He got a great takedown, I believe it was a hip toss on Jack Jenkins, and Jack Jenkins did the Joe Pyfer, where he tried landing on his right arm, and as he did that, his elbow essentially popped out, a KO TKO for Chepe. I think Chepe is going to show Morgan what the UFC is about. Chepe Mariscal, he's fought in the LFA in the past. He's been a high-level fighter for quite some time. I'm just more confident in Chepe Mariscal being at his more natural weight, getting the win here, either by a KO TKO within the first 2 rounds or getting a 3-round decision here. Next up, Ignacio Bahamondes versus Christos Giagos. Now, I think Ignacio Bahamondes has a lot of potential in the UFC. He is a really big kid, a 6'2", 76-inch reach. He's going up against Christos Giagos, who's 34 years old, 5'8", 72-inch reach. Ignacio Bahamondes is a very talented kickboxer. He can fight you at range. He can get into the dirty boxing exchanges and hold his own, even though I don't like it when fighters as tall and lanky as him are okay with doing that. He has some grit and toughness, and he has a chin, so I don't see Christos Giagos hitting Ignacio with a big overhand right and putting Ignacio out. If anything, Giagos is going to try and get this to the ground, ride out a 3-round decision while attempting submissions and some light ground and pound just so the fight doesn't get stood up. Giagos is not necessarily the most impressive UFC fighter. He's fought some names in the UFC, notably Charles Oliveira, got a submission loss to Thiago Moises, lost to Arman Sarukian. So he's fighting good competition, but he's not necessarily being competitive. So I think this is a very good test for Bahamondes. Bahamondes is going to be successful as long as this fight stays on the feet. As long as this fight is on the ground, Giagos is going to be successful. So it's all a matter of who takes the initiative and who tries harder to keep the fight where. I'm going to go with Ignacio Bahamondes. Although if Giagos pulls out an upset decision here, I won't be too surprised. Walter Walker, the brother of Johnny Walker, going up against Lucas Brzeski. Now, I'm going to go with Walter Walker here. He has essentially the same size and frame as Johnny Walker. He's 6'4", 6'5", just like Johnny Walker. He's got a very long reach, but this guy likes to grapple. And one thing that I really like is that I've seen some clips and some highlights and one of his regional fights. He doesn't act and play around the same way like Johnny Walker does. He's there for the competition. So I think if you're going to mix that Johnny Walker family athleticism with some healthy competitiveness, I think it's a very good recipe. Let's see Walter Walker put some of those genetics to good use. So I think Walter Walker, who's already 11-0, he's going to move on to 12-0. Lucas Brzeski is not the most talented heavyweight, so Walter Walker is going to get the win here. Next up, I think this is going to be the firecracker of the night, the best fight of the night, most likely. Trevor Peek versus Charlie Campbell. If this doesn't end in a first, second round knockout, it's just going to be a drag-out war. Charlie Campbell, much like Trevor Peek, likes to get in your face, get in the pocket, and bang. And he doesn't have the best defense striking while he does this. But if we're rating Trevor Peek's striking offense and defense versus Charlie Campbell's striking offense and defense, Charlie Campbell has better striking defense while he throws his punches than Trevor Peek. Trevor Peek is extremely open for counter shots when he throws his punches. Charlie Campbell has already been a victim to counter punches in the pocket in his Dana White Contender Series fight. So he knows more than anybody how dangerous it is to fight in the pocket. He continues to do it anyways. If you watched his fight at UFC Noche, he had an absolutely great first round knockout, put on a great performance. I like Charlie Campbell. I like Trevor Peek. I think they're both great personalities for the UFC lightweight division. Unfortunately, I think Trevor Peek is going to get knocked out here by Charlie Campbell. And Charlie Campbell is going to move on to 2-0 in the UFC. Now, heading the prelims of the card, Court McGee versus Alex Morono. This is the battle of the two vets. Court McGee is almost 40 years old. OG, winner of the Ultimate Fighter. Got to give credit to Court McGee. A, for getting clean off of drugs, and B, being in the UFC for this long, man. Alex Morono is 33 years old. He is a good coach. I'm going to go Alex Morono here. Alex Morono is a very smart fighter. He knows when he has these older guys hurt that he can just put on the gas and take them out of there. He's a very intelligent guy, and he's got one of, if not the best nickname in UFC. So yeah, Alex Morono, I'd say he's either going to get a late finish here or he ends up with the 3-round decision. Now, Norma Dumont versus Jermaine Durandamy. Hey, Norma Dumont, I'm just always happy to see you. But unfortunately, we do not cover WMMA here at Bettrmma. Respectfully, I don't waste my viewers' time. Now, this guy, Alan Talenghi versus Victor Hugo. I've seen this guy, Victor Hugo, fight on the regional scene, and his name is The Striker, and you would think that he's like this very technical kickboxer. Nothing like it whatsoever. Very wild, open on the feet. His last 2 wins are actually by submission. Alan Talenghi, though he is coming off of a loss in his last fight against Chris Gutierrez, it was a good fight. You know, Chris Gutierrez is not a bad loss, and in the past he's gotten a win over Chad Engellinger, and he knocked out Kevin Kroom. And I know Tim Elliott loves that. Altalang, however you say his name, I think he's going to get a big win here, either by finish or decision. And Piero Rodriguez versus Cynthia Calvillo. Respectfully, we will not cover this fight. I hope you guys, when this fight is on, find something else better with your time to do. I'm not putting up with it anymore, and neither should you guys. This is Bettrmma. Dan Argueta versus Jean Matsumoto. Now, this Jean Matsumoto kid is very young, 14-0, 24 years old. You can't really say that he's fought the most high-level competition, but the kid does have some good submission skills. He's got some good-looking Muay Thai skills. He looks dangerous. Dan Argueta, he's really not the most active fighter. Never has really done anything in his career that's made me go, wow, Dan Argueta is like a great prospect. It always just seems like he's just one of these training partners for these guys like Cub Swanson. He's there to put in work, be a training partner. And yeah, he's in the UFC and he'll have a couple of fights. I'm going to go with the youth. I'm going to go with the hungry up-and-comer, Jean Matsumoto. Moving on to 15-0. Last pick of the card, Dylan Budka versus Cesar Almeida. Now, this Cesar Almeida guy is interesting because he's fought Alex Pereira 3 times in the past in kickboxing. He lost to Alex Pereira, then he beat Alex Pereira by decision, then he lost to Alex Pereira again. So it's very obvious that this is the guy who is sitting at the bar like, oh, I beat that guy once. You know, Izzy and Alex, they make fun of each other. Who's that guy? But Cesar Almeida is that guy. The guy is 36 years old, coming into the UFC far too late in his career, if you ask me. And he's going up against this Dylan Budka kid who, if he's not on the sauce, he definitely looks like it. I've seen some of his fights in the regional scene. Got a very impressive early TKO in his career. Also had a nice fight in the LFA where he showed a good ability to wrestle, then have some good volume strikes when his takedowns get denied, which is always a good sign in the middleweight division. You hate to see a middleweight who relies on the takedown too much. Then when it gets denied, they're just gassed and they can't throw anything on the feet because they threw everything into their takedown attempts. So Budka is an athletic young kid. I think he's either going to clip Cesar Almeida or simply take Almeida down and get the submission here. Cesar Almeida has the chance to knock out Budka for sure. If Budka chooses to stand on the feet for too long and make this a kickboxing match, don't be surprised if Almeida knocks out Budka. But I think if Budka is serious about his UFC career, he's going to take this opportunity in his debut, get this kickboxer down to the ground early, make it an MMA fight, get the easy submission, and start off his UFC career and this UFC Fight Night event right. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you guys think about Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis. Thank you guys for supporting Better MMA. We out.